The nation's judicial capital was a hive of activity yesterday as the Electoral Court in Bloemfontein heard arguments in the case of the ANC's objection about the uMkhonto Wesizwe Party's registration for the upcoming election. Now, the ANC wants MK's registration to be declared unlawful. The ANC argues that the application that was submitted by uMkhonto Wesizwe Party was a supplemented application. Now, the court has the task to determine whether this was legal certainty about whether there was legal certainty about MK on the 2024 ballot, and whether the IEC can in fact consider an application which has been supplemented in order to register a party. Now, the court will inform the parties of its decision at a later stage. But with us here in studio to discuss this matter further, I'm joined by political analyst Dr. Ongama Mtimka. So good to have you in studio for a change. And of course, joining us virtually, Executive Chairman of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Terry Tselane. Great to have you with us as well, Terry. So let me start by just going back to June 2023. And Terry, this is where I want to bring you in, as someone who's worked in this environment. So June 2023, uMkhonto Wesizwe puts in an application with the Electoral Commission here in South Africa. And for some reason, there was something not quite right or something that needed to be added, supplemented to that application. The IEC then asks for that, and they ultimately supplement the original application. So many people are asking whether that is something that routinely happens or whether there's anything untoward as far as what we've been told has happened.
Well, there is nothing untoward about the steps that the Commission has actually taken, or the Chief Electoral Officer in particular. Let's look at what Section 15 says. The Section 15 that intends registering must submit certain information. Firstly, it's got to submit its deed of foundation, the Constitution, as well as signatures of people who support that political party. And in this case, from 2001, it was 1,000 signatures that were required. Now, when MK Party registered, another thing is that they've got to also put this or publish this in the Gazette. So when the MK Party published this, the Commission or the Chief Electoral Officer or Deputy Chief Electoral Officer brought it to its attention that, in fact, there were inaccuracies and inconsistencies in terms of the number of signatures that are required. And therefore, they were given an opportunity to cure the defect that had been identified. But the party had followed all the processes and procedures in terms of registration. And that is nothing untoward for the Commission or for its officials to request a particular party to comply and submit certain information that would make it to be in line with the requirements of the legal framework.
So part of the argument or the dispute, as was put to the Electoral Court yesterday, Terry, is that the ANC contends that this should have been a new application to remedy what was deficient with the first application and not a supplemented application. Your thoughts on that?
Like I've indicated, that the Chief Electoral Officer does have the power to inform a party that is registering that it does not comply, and therefore expect that political party, if it still wants to register, to submit information that would actually be, that would make it to be in line with what is required in the law. So I don't think there is anything irregular about asking a party to comply with certain requirements and then provide the information that is outstanding.
So they didn't have to submit a new application. They could just provide the supplementary information.
Yeah, it is a discretion of the Chief Electoral Officer to do so. So instead of actually saying to them, you've got to start an application all over again, they said, I'll be satisfied if you just give us the information that's outstanding. But still, they published the information again in a gazette, even after supplementing their application requirements.
And of course, Dr. Mtimka, the ANC missed the deadline to put forward their objection during that time. But of course, the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, saying they are not really bothered by uMkhonto Wesizwe Party registering. But what they are concerned about is, of course, the name uMkhonto Wesizwe. They don't care about the party being registered, a party being registered, but that name, uMkhonto Wesizwe, is one of the other issues they take that they take issue with.
Good morning, Sakina. So I think the issue here is that on being aware that it had missed the initial process, the ANC is trying to fault the procedure, and what Mr. Tselane has explained is the right of the Chief Electoral Officer to entertain after having sent a rejection letter, because the rejection letter is there that rejects the initial application. Now, what they are problematizing is what then the Chief Electoral Officer is at liberty to do once and what the implication of that is in terms of how do you treat the application? Is it a live application or must a new one come? The reason why they're wanting to do that, it's because if they are successful in faltering that process and declaring it as illegal, then they declare the registration to be irregular because it would not have gone through this process of again going and advertising. Now, I think one of the principles that I took from what some of the council was saying yesterday I think it was actually for the MK party, is to highlight that the Electoral Commission's business is not how to stop parties from contesting elections. Its business is how to enable parties from contesting elections. So after the issue about the signatures, which they said looked like they were not the people who were claimed to have completed them, looked like there was an irregularity where in the signatures looked like one person had done them. So they rejected on that basis. Once it had been corrected, I think that an electoral commission that doesn't want to be accused of being a political player would take that decision.
So the other question that was raised then, Terry, was that of jurisdiction. And we heard yesterday at the Electoral Court this being canvassed right up front. The ANC's legal representatives making sure that they spell out why they believe this matter had to go to the Electoral Court. Again, the processes, the procedures, because it gives us as the electorate an opportunity to look at how these processes actually unfold.
Indeed. So what seems to have happened is that at first, when the ANC objected to the commission, they objected on the basis of the trademark and on the basis that the name MK, its colors, its logo, it's part of its heritage. Now, the commission dismissed that, firstly on the basis that the ANC is not an aggrieved party, because Section 16 of the Electoral Act indicates the ground on which a party can actually object against the registration of another party. And then those grounds basically means that the logo, the symbols, the abbreviation, and the name should actually look similar to that of a party that has actually long been using those that is registered. Now, if you look at the name, the logo, the color, and everything of MK, it does not resemble that of the ANC. And as a result of that, the Commission just dismissed it on that basis that you are not actually supposed to be here because you are not an aggrieved party. So the second step then was for them to lodge a formal complaint if indeed the MK did not meet the requirements in terms of Section 15 of the Electoral Commission Act. So instead of actually making an appeal to the Commission on that particular aspect, they decided to go to the Electoral Court. Now, here is the difficulty, and hence the issue of the jurisdiction. The decision of the Chief Electoral Officer to register political parties, if any party wants to contest it, they've got to contest it firstly with the Commission. And then that has not actually happened because the grounds on which it was given at first did not actually comply with the legislation because the ANC was not an aggrieved party. So you needed a party that was that had logo and symbols that were similar if you wanted to object on the basis of Section 16 of the Electoral Commission Act.
So, Dr. Mtimka, it comes down to politics, doesn't it? And the Jacob Zuma factor, it would seem. Because for the reasons that Terry Tselane has just mentioned, it would seem as though all is well and the party is registered and they will be contesting the elections, given that the ANC didn't seem to have grounds to object to either its registration, its formation, or anything else. But then enter Jacob Zuma. And is this what's muddying the waters?
Two things in terms of the politics. I was going to go there, by the way. One thing to comment is that you have a governing party that does not have the liberty to instruct an electoral management body to do its bidding. That's commendable by our standards in the continent. That's one. The second issue is that it's an issue about politics of ownership of heritage. I guess that's going to be a debate for next week, where the right of members, I was listening to Jacob Zuma's
He
address,
sort of preempted that.
His supporters talking about how this is a collective ownership and making the analogy of a house. If somebody is taking you away from your house and that we own MK, all of us, and it's not owned by the ANC per se. Now that's interesting in terms of the debates that are going to take place next week. It doesn't make it any less a political issue about who owns heritage. And I think that in the Cope era as well, these were the issues. And Cope was able to actually continue because they had not used the ANC, they had used a Congress of the People as a reference point. It was part of the heritage of the party, but it couldn't be claimed to be owned exclusively by the party, by the ANC at the time. And then lastly, the point you make about Jacob Zuma being a factor. And I think that the intensity of the ANC's, a fight on this is about that not only is he, bringing his own brand to support this party, but also a combination of the politics of Jacob Zuma and what he represents, and coupled with that, with the brand of MK. It's interesting in terms of it's not likely to confuse, which is the line I think the Electoral Commission is working on, but nonetheless has got implications as far as how voters see this, because former President Jacob Zuma is locating what he's doing in the politics of the ANC as an attempt to redeem the ANC, as an attempt to correct the ANC outside of the ANC.
That history lesson that he delivered there yesterday, and making sure to punctuate that he was part of uMkhonto Wesizwe as Jacob Zuma as well. Terry Tselane, as we wrap this up very briefly, there was also the issue of the ANC basically saying that if uMkhonto Wesizwe appears on the ballot paper, this would actually encroach on free and fair elections. Just your final thought on that.
Well, let's look at it this way. When the ANC started they raised the issue of trademark. And then when they realized that this would not actually stand in the Electoral Court, they moved away from the trademark and the heritage and gravitated towards administrative and procedural defects that they think exist in terms of the way the party was registered. And that's where things are at the moment. But as I've indicated, in terms of the registration, I think the Electoral Commission has actually followed all the processes. And unfortunately, the ANC also missed an opportunity to object at the time when it was supposed to object, which is during the time when the publication was made in the Gazette.
All right, gentlemen, sure we'll be talking much more about this in the coming days and months. But thanks so much, the Executive Chairman of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Terry Tselane, and here in studio with me, political analyst Dr. Ongama Mtimka, discussing the case the ANC brought before the Electoral Court in Bloemfontein yesterday over the registration of uMkhonto Wesizwe.